Welcome everyone to Blackmere Live. As a way of quick introduction, Blackmere Consulting is a talent acquisition and technical consulting firm that places niche talent at thoughtful and interesting companies. We work with government agencies and companies across various industries, including healthcare and finance. We'd love to get to know you better, so please head to our website and sign up for our mailing list to keep in touch, www.blackmereconsulting.com. And to introduce our guest, Michael Swinarski. Am I saying that correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay, I thought so, but I wanted to double check. Michael Swinarski is an accomplished information security leader known for his creative approach, collaborative style, and innovative strategies. With a focus on consensus building, compliance, and cost reduction, Michael combines servant leadership with a commitment to team development. Committed to enabling secure business advancement and avoiding a no culture, Michael Swinarski is a trusted resource ready to share his extensive knowledge and connect with like-minded professionals, which we're doing today. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. And last but not least, our own Domini Clark. Domini is the CEO of Blackmere Consulting, which she founded in 2011. She leads executive recruitment across various industries with a functional focus on cybersecurity and data science. Under her leadership, the Blackmere team specializes in difficult to fill critical hires, including executive placement, data science, wireless research, and energy-related technical leadership. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Domini and Michael, and I'll let y'all take it away with a bit of Michael's background.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Molly. Michael, I'm so glad you're here. And I want to start off by letting everyone know what you're doing now and who you're with, because you are in a very highly regulated, risk-prone industry. Let's start there.
Certainly. So I am the deputy CISO over at CorVel Corporation. My team is based out of the East Coast, but we've got offices all over the country. We've got 3 lines of business. We do have one of those lines of businesses that, as you say, we're working with HIPAA data, and we have a lot of financial services regulations that are involved across all 3 lines of business.
So you have really spent the bulk of your career in financial services and healthcare. So you know this highly regulated environment probably, I'm going to say, like the back of your hand.
Well, that's very generous. And I hesitate only because, and especially what we've seen in the last couple of years, is the regulations are very much in flux. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of updates. It's a challenge to keep up. I mean, it's almost a full-time job just to kind of track where these things are going and trying to apply some foresight as to what's coming next.
Sure. And it is a moving target. I know that some of these regulations are rumors at this stage, and we're all trying to get ahead of them and figure out where they're actually going to go. So let's backtrack just a little bit. What got you into cyber in the first place? How did you get started?
Like many men, we blame our mother-in-laws. To some exception, I'd have to say the same thing. So I started off my IT career building database solutions with a very high focus on protecting the confidentiality of those data stores, protecting the integrity of the data structure, making sure that it's accurate, as well as making sure that they're highly available, which is very much the foundation for a lot of our information security processes and procedures and approaches. So there was kind of a natural progression that happened within the career that a formal role in information security made a lot of sense as the next step. But what really kind of lit the fire in where I heard that calling came as a result of my mother-in-law several years ago. She called and she was a little bit shaken, a little upset, and she was explaining that someone had used her debit card and she had no idea how that could have happened, and she had to, go through the whole process of working with the bank. And what we found out was it was related to a breach where the debit card was exposed. But what was somewhat infuriating was the debit card was used to pay someone's court fees after already being convicted of another crime. And unfortunately,
oh, bless their hearts.
Yeah, it was like, thanks. We actually tried to work with the court saying, hey, there's got to be a relationship here between the actual transaction and and the person who did it. There's got to be some record there. And I'm sure there was, but they couldn't share it. And so it seemed very, very frustrating for folks. And it was like, I think that's kind of what got me started on what can I do to help avoid this for other people? And that's really what kind of pulled me in.
That, if you're going to blame your mother-in-law for something, that's a pretty good thing to blame her for the rest of your career. She gets credit for it, maybe, instead of blame.
Yes. No,
it turned out pretty good.
I say that very, very tongue-in-cheek. My mother-in-law was a great lady. So.
I love it. I love it. So you have really started with a foundational piece of truly understanding the backbone of a network and evolved into security. How have you seen it grow and change over the last several years?
Oh, well, it's really interesting from the perspective of, I'll start with calling out a former colleague of mine, and I don't know that he's watching today. I could share that he had a theory that information security fundamentally changes every 3 years. And, his theory was the techniques, the approach, the threats, they evolve over time. And as a result, the response, the protections, the controls, all of those sorts of things had to change as well. And I think the biggest thing that's come out of the last, I'm going to say since 2020, is I think the theory that my good friend Zach referenced is it's only increased and gotten faster. That 3-year time cycle is probably more like 18 months, maybe even shorter. The evolution is pretty much faster. And especially when you're looking at things like social engineering, it's expanding into beyond just your own perimeter. And I think that's one of the big challenges that I think a lot of folks are learning into is it's no longer about your own systems or even your own cloud properties or subscriptions, but beyond and how it is those things are impacted. We see this a lot with third-party risk. I think is right now, what we're seeing over the last year is that risk is being redefined after being redefined during the pandemic. And I think that's very much a reflection of that accelerated timeline.
So give me an example of that redefinition. And maybe in the last 18 months, I know this last 3 years have been pivotal for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
And frankly, in security, I think that has really launched some pretty interesting behaviors.
It has. It absolutely has. So just kind of, I hate to relive the last 3 years because nobody wants to do that. But, we saw these incredible impacts with disruptions in the supply chain that made people really rethink just how fragile and critical when one little thing happens in the supply chain, there's a downstream effect that really is very problematic. We see that in manufacturing. We see this in electronics. We see this in a lot of industries. And, so the point, I think a lot of the economists would argue that it's had a very negative impact in our overall economics, inflation, things like that, where the supply and the chain actually influenced that supply and demand and caused a lot of the economics that we're still dealing with today. Going kind of that next step, supply chains did finally rebound. People did make adjustments. I think more and more companies are doing more to map out the full supply chain end to end. Those are good things that are going to help us for next time. But again, the evolution is still happening, where now we're starting to see I not only have to be concerned with what's happening within my supply chain, what's happening with my vendors, what's happening with my strategic partners, but also what is happening with our customers, what is happening with other entities that we may not have ever even known about. I've had multiple conversations in the last year with companies where they literally were like, we've never heard of you before. We have no idea why you're calling. But it's creating an interesting dialogue with a lot of entities that I would have never expected before. And I think furthering that with a lot of what we're seeing with cloud and a lot of the more current attacks on social engineering coming through social media, I think is just continuing to expand what that surface area looks like.
Sure. And you and I talked initially about some of the more interesting phishing attacks that you've been seeing and the uptick in those. So talk to me a little bit about that evolution as well.
So absolutely. The phishing and what we're seeing is just getting more and more challenging. So, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was fairly easy to spot a phishing email. You'd see a lot of grammatical errors. You would see spelling errors. If you're really paying attention, you might see, strange things in the email address. There were telltale signs not that long ago. It's becoming much, much harder to really be certain in a lot of cases. The emails are becoming much more sophisticated, better grammar, better spelling, better graphics, better formatting. The quality has increased considerably. And I think that's one of the big challenges is that, when we talk about folks recognizing that email and stopping it from actually enticing links being clicked or attachments being opened, it's becoming too much, too catered, too high quality, and too focused to where it is very understandable why somebody would say this looks like normal business. And so
That's right.
That education also has to evolve as a result.
Well, and it's difficult. So we actually experienced something very similar to this. And thankfully, my accountant is very, very smart and asked all the right questions because it looked pristine. It was really, I don't want to say kudos, but it looked great compared to what we used to see a couple of years ago even. This made a lot of sense. And had she not asked the right questions, it could have gone south real fast.
That's absolutely true.
We wouldn't have had anything to go back. We wouldn't have had anything to go back and say, no, here was what you should have seen. It was just, why doesn't this make sense? So I think about this. We are, of course, a small organization. How do you handle that in a much larger organization? How do you come up with lessons learned when it looks legitimate?
Well, it's a challenge, especially in a smaller organization, and there's a lot of need there because that's often the initial wave of attack, right? If an adversary can make their way into a smaller organization, they use that to they envelop the little fish to get to the bigger fish. So the small organizations are very much under attack. So, and for reasons that are obvious, they don't have the same budget, they don't have the same staffing, they don't have the same number of people that are focused on the IT and the controls and the verification and pen testing and all the things that you see in larger organizations. So it does kind of leave them vulnerable. But that security awareness, that testing, discussions, open dialogue, and is what I share with a lot of folks is it's important to make sure that when these things come up, when they happen for real or they happen in a simulation or a test, it's a learning opportunity. It should never be punitive. I've known people that in information security that are convinced that anybody who falls for a phishing email should be chastised and maybe even fired. I don't understand that thinking because especially lately where the quality of the emails should become so good. But, from my perspective is every opportunity is an opportunity to learn, right? And the idea that the user community is the weakest part of your security chain is something that I think is outdated. It's the wrong mindset. I think we have to realize that your users and the people at the endpoint is your most attacked control. And I think we need to recognize and kind of, help them and treat them as exactly that. This is the target and they need help, not criticism, right? And I think that's the important thing to remember is, you want to have the layered control so that if something does happen, you try to contain it and stop it from happening. But keeping those conversations and that dialogue and that awareness front of mind, and like you said, encourage those questions. Right? People only ask those questions when they're comfortable, when they know that, this isn't going to create a problem. So if you want that participation, if you want people asking those questions, you want to build that team.
Agreed. So as this is morphing and becoming more difficult, how are you changing that support to the end users, the most attacked area?
Right. So our organization, we do simulations to go in, of course, most larger organizations or mid-sized organizations, they have compliance needs where they do their training every year and they talk about, yes, this is what phishing looks like and this is how you report it and you should avoid that and don't click those links and etc. We try to continue that conversation, not just for that initial training, but try to continue it year long. We have newsletter articles. We have a section we actually just migrated to a new SharePoint platform, but there's a feed of news articles that are we pick out specific current events that related to what could be impacting you, right? Things like the lesson learned is use good passwords, use multi-factor authentication, patch your devices, be on the lookout of these kinds of social engineering attacks, because those are the things that, people are directly working with every day. I think one of the important things that we like to share is the things that they don't see. There are things that we collect that frankly is really good threat intelligence. How many phishing emails does somebody get is much smaller than the number of phishing emails we actually block. And when we show them how many phishing emails are actually coming into our environment that they may never see, it's impactful, and it keeps them front of mind, and it keeps that conversation going. And again, it's about allowing people to ask the questions, learn more, and expand that shared pool of knowledge.
Excellent, excellent. All good ideas that everyone should be employing for sure. Well, and you said something at one point that Molly brought up at the very beginning that we just thought was fantastic. When you say you have used phishing as a networking tool, what does that mean?
So fantastic is an interesting word. I find it more, maybe a bit more intriguing. But I'll ask a couple of rhetorical questions from the perspective of what we see out there right now. Is I'm sure most of the folks are familiar with the memes about information security as a team sport, right? My question is, do you have a vision for what your team should look like? And more importantly, do you have a plan for making that team a reality? And so the vision, as we've seen this evolution and this expansion of these attacks and threat surface, and we have to think about, so does that vision of what that team looked like also needs to evolve. And I am finding myself reaching out to other organizations because they've experienced some sort of business email compromise, and we started receiving phishing emails from them. And there's couple of goals I try to accomplish. One, I'm looking to build some assurance that they have been able to identify the problem, contain it, take the remediation steps to prevent it from happening in the future. Do we have assurance that we're not going to continue to see these phishing emails from that particular source 2 weeks from now? And, they may have stopped it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, in a very short period of time. And having some dialogue around that, but also thinking a lot about how we develop a much longer term relationship and actually do a little networking, meet these people and exchange ideas, share that threat intelligence. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? This is how we build a stronger community, especially when you're involving a lot of those smaller businesses. The smaller businesses can partner with those larger organizations that may have the more monitoring tools to learn more about what's really going on out there. This is kind of an interesting, there's a little bit of a dance and a kind of a challenge to the conversation approach that I'll be honest, I'm not sure I've gotten them all right. But I've had to kind of evolve, not only evolve the approach and my communication style to cater to the audience. In some cases, I have to pivot during the conversation. But some things to remember: you're calling out an organization that may have never heard of you. They don't know who you are, and oh, by the way, they've just experienced some sort of incident, and they're probably not feeling very good about the world right now, right? And so I've
not super trusting,
not trusting at all. And I've reached out to folks, and I called very recently, very nice young man, wasn't sure if he could give me his name. And he wasn't trying to be difficult. He wasn't trying to be at all dodgy or anything like that. He just doesn't know who I am, first of all. And second of all, you have to remember, he's not sure what he can tell me. In a lot of these cases, there might be lawyers involved. And so they've had some sort of breach. Maybe they've brought in a third party. They brought in counsel to potentially talk to their insurance. They're not sure what they can share, who they can talk to. And you have to give them a moment to kind of figure that out. But, my goal is I've got kind of a standard list of their questions. I think of them more as talking points. And there's things I want to find out about. And again, it's about building that assurance, but also how do we formulate that relationship longer term so that if there is something that happens 2 years from now, does that conversation get easier? Does this become a dialogue that we can continue? Them knowing my name because they've talked to me before is a lot better than them wondering, hey, is this actually the adversary adversary that's continuing their attack. I'm a firm believer. It doesn't matter if you're a customer, if you're a vendor, if you're a competitor, if you're a business competitor, that's fine. We can be fierce business competitors, but at the end of the day, we're not adversarial. And the adversary is trying to get us both. And so whatever we can do to work together to taper them, I think is a larger benefit to the overall industry.
So let's say a phishing email comes in, or a couple come in from an organization. Are you picking up the phone and saying, hey guys, did you know this is happening? Is that how that goes?
Often. So we usually start that with, there's some investigation. We want to know, does this look like an email that came from what I would call a legitimate email address, being, it's something that belongs to a legitimate business, compared to somebody tweaked a domain name, tried to kind of trick us into believing maybe it's somebody else or something along that line. If we determine, hey, this is somebody that, this is a real email account and not something that a fraudster had set up, then the next thing I want to know is, do we have a relationship with them, and what is it? Because, and again, this is about crafting the right conversation to have with, and understanding one of those touch points is, if this is somebody who's a vendor or a strategic partner, the next question might be, well, okay, are we sharing data with them in some form or fashion that we need to inquire about? Right? Because that might be an added question. Most of those calls, though, are, hey, do you know that we're getting these emails?
That's right.
99% of the time, by the time I get to the point where I'm calling them, they do know. That's a positive. They're still, and that's usually why they're a little leery as to who is this guy calling. And let's talk about what happened and how can we help, and what information can we share, and creating kind of a dialogue where we learn about what we've seen, what they're experiencing, and it's very much a verbal conversation where I'm picking up the phone, acting on what we know about that particular business, and starting a conversation.
So there's this idea out there that collaboration is the future of cybersecurity, that is the number one element that can actually move the needle. And it's very difficult because there is an element of trust that has to be established.
Right.
And when do you know who you can trust? Much less we have a history through many of these breaches of not sharing information because we don't want our vulnerabilities to be known.
Right.
We've got ISACs out there for almost every industry, but the sharing is difficult. How do you think we ultimately will be able to get over that hump to a place where that collaboration is meaningful?
Well, I completely agree. It is difficult. And I think, the ISACs and a lot of these other organizations that are forming has gone a long way to moving the mark. I'm a big fan of ISACs. I enjoy our relationship with CISA and law enforcement, having those exchanges of ideas and what's been going on and trying to share those sorts of things. It is interesting when you asked about the evolution of information security, that I think that is another one that we are still working toward. Is once upon a time, not really that long ago, we didn't want to advertise those vulnerabilities, and we still don't. There's still some limitations as to what we want to share. I've seen shops where they didn't even want to share within their own internal company how many phishing emails that they received every year, because they were concerned that could get out and somebody might share that with somebody else outside of the company, and all of those sorts of things. The reality is we have to embrace current situation and realize we're all experiencing this. This is not unique to us, right? Everybody's getting hit. Even those personal email addresses that have nothing to do with your corporate data, still getting phished. So there is kind of a foundation of something of I guess you could characterize it as mistrust. There is this deep notion of we're going to keep these things secret, and kind of opening that up and changing that mindset is going to take time. And I do see that. I can share some of those conversations that I've had regarding BEC. The responses are varied. I've had some that are very guarded, who the heck are you? And I don't need to tell you anything. I have no contract in place that I have to tell you anything. Fine. I get that. And, there's a few reasons for that. One, they don't want to admit to any more than they absolutely have. But on the other side, and probably more and more often, and I think it has to do with that shift mindset, is almost a relief. They're glad somebody called. Yeah. They appreciate the fact that, somebody inquired that didn't necessarily jump to bad conclusions that you did something wrong, right? Because at the end of the day, they were attacked. If you can kind of make it clear to those folks, hey, we don't don't want to turn this into a fight. We want to work together. We want to collaborate. We want to share ideas. Even some of the best conversations, they're still a little bit leery, like, who the heck are you? And again, they want to make sure I'm not the adversary. But once they kind of get over that hump and we can actually have some good conversation, they're usually just really relieved. I've talked to people who, frankly, they feel overwhelmed by the entire experience because maybe they just haven't had enough incident response experience, and they just want to bounce ideas off of people. They want to hear other people's experience. And those are the things I'm more than glad to share. And it's one of the biggest areas where I learn new ideas and techniques. And let's face it, information security people love to get together, and this is true with IT people. This is one thing where information security and IT can get together and complain about your controls vendors and commiserate and exchange who's got the better appliance that could have helped with that particular problem. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity to hear about other vendors or other products that maybe you haven't used or tried yet, and hear from a variety of people as to whether or not it was really helpful or it just, didn't save them from that particular thing. And I'm not saying any appliance is going to save you. It's not. But you're looking for the one that's going to be the best one, and it's going to be most often to fix or block things. So hearing that feedback, hearing from other folks, it's a really helpful dialogue for everyone involved, not just the person who's reporting to them saying, hey, you guys phished us.
Sure. Just knowing that they're not alone, I think would go a really
absolutely true.
Long way.
Absolutely true.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt really quick just to let everyone in the audience know that please feel free to pop any question as Domini and Michael continue chatting.
Excellent. So I'm curious, do you think other organizations are taking this step of reaching out when these sorts of attacks come through?
Oh, absolutely. I've also been on the receiving end. I've had people reach out.
Good.
Fortunately, we've been able to, our controls have withstood a lot of attempts, a lot of the credential harvesting and the token theft and all of the things. They're trying to get in so that they can either inject themselves into conversation or, potentially, phish others. The controls have held. I'm working with IT. We've got some new initiatives that I think is going to really make a big difference to further that and, continue that evolution. But I have, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, that larger surface area. I've had folks call up saying, hey, I just got this phone call from somebody claiming to be John Smith, and he says he works for your company. We've never heard of John Smith. We don't know who he is. And things like that, where our intellectual property is kind of being used inappropriately. I'll be honest, I was a little bit afraid I was going to be late for this conversation because I'm going to have to reach out to one of the social media companies and explain to them that person does not represent us. Was actually had to confirm from their friends in HR. Yeah, we've never heard of that person. We can't possibly monitor the entire internet. Although we have implemented some new monitoring to help look for those sorts of things. Yeah, that input, that feedback for that much larger surface area is becoming important. And yes, we're hearing from folks. I haven't gotten a lot of calls, but I've had a few, and I can't tell you how much I've appreciated it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think that goes back to that. If you see something, say something.
Oh, sure.
And there's no punishment there. And that's within our organizations and amongst our organizations. You ever see anything? Let us know.
Sure.
Where do you see these attacks going in the future? What do you think is next? What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, when people think phishing, they think of email. That's going to have to probably change.
It's text.
Oh my goodness. We just had kind of a barrage very recently, and they seem to kind of go in spikes where all of a sudden we see a bunch of these text messages claiming to be corporate executives. And, next thing you know, they need you to go buy a gift card. And we've written newsletter articles and sent out email blasts, and we've done a lot to educate folks about that. The other area is social media, Facebook and LinkedIn and all of these things that we all use every day. Mm-hmm. They're very much becoming a medium for these adversaries. And that's a challenge because, we are trying to keep a lookout for, adverse people doing things within these platforms. But to be honest, it's easier to hide in Facebook or Instagram or these other things and send messages to individuals that are maybe looking for a job or, might be interested in your particular service that you have to offer. There is a gap in that relationship between companies such as mine or even yours, where if you call up those social media companies and say, hey, your platform is being used to propagate fraud, it's a much tougher conversation. The level of bureaucracy and things that they do really slow down the process to actually getting it addressed. I have a ticket open with a email provider, not to throw anybody under the bus, but the email provider, it was one of these cases where we had someone report phishing regarding job scams, and they didn't even bother to register a domain. They just use a free email account, and it had our company name and the username at their domain, and we actually obtained the email with all of the headers and all of the data and all of the information, and we went to them and said, hey, are you aware that this is happening? We really need this to stop. Can you get involved? Close this account down. They're using our name. So we opened a intellectual property ticket with them. We opened up a fraud ticket with them. They're both kind of sitting there without very much response, right? I think this is an area that probably needs to change. Is we need that dialogue, and I realize that these companies have to make sure that I am legitimately reporting these things. I get there needs to be a process. Yeah. But when that process takes weeks to months, that whole time is that even after they've got the report, it's still being used to commit fraud, right?
Sure.
This is not a new complaint. We've had challenges with domain register companies, same kind of thing. And believe me, we've filed some things with some social network companies. They're very slow to respond. Because of that, that's where I see where maybe there's going to be, I don't know about less email, but it's only going to grow, those attacks coming through those other mediums. And we're going to have to figure out how to monitor and respond to that and figure out how to form the relationships to actually resolve and address some of those things.
Get some traction. Yeah. Sure.
I have a couple of questions. First, Michael, so we receive many spam calls, etc., and it's really getting hard to distinguish between what's real and what isn't. Do you have maybe like 3 specific things that you go to in the back of your mind to determine if something is fake or real?
3? So, anytime.
For the layperson.
Sure. So it really is about, it's about that relationship. I think that's so important, even outside of information security. If you suddenly receive a piece of email or a phone call from someone you've never heard of, and they're looking for you to take action, it's a good idea to ask those questions. Who is this person? Sure. Is this legitimate? What is that relationship? Is there another way that I can confirm as to whether or not this is who they say they are? So, and that's something that we teach all of our folks about email. If you get an unexpected email and they're asking you to click a link and you had no idea that they were going to be reaching out to sending you that information, but you also happen to have their phone number, not the phone number in their email signature, but you have a known way to contact them, most people can appreciate you calling out and saying, hey, I got this email. I didn't expect it. I just wanted to confirm, did you intend to send this to me? And get that information from them directly. If it is somebody who's calling, and telephone is still a means and a method for attack, sometimes you have to kind of make some commitments to let me follow up with you while you go and you verify, is that someone who really intended is who they say they are. Googling that phone number, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. But maybe going back to the original company and reaching out to them and say, hey, this individual called me and I'm a little bit surprised because you never expressed an interest in your product or have a need. The other big one that right now, and this is one that I'm seeing it come from email, from others, or those random phone calls, is, hey, we're reaching out to you from your support team. We're technical support. We're here to help you. We just need access to your computer, right? So that we can fix whatever's going on that we say we detected on your machine. It's an old call. I'm seeing some slightly new variations to the attack, but it's at the end of the day, there are literally now entire call centers that are responding to these kind of telephone initiated attacks where they may send you an email that says, hey, call us immediately, right? Because they're going to scare you a little bit, and you got to call us and get this fixed. And there's a whole call center of people that are ready and willing to help you. They're not helping, right? Yeah. And so absolutely, it's to a point where you really got to be very comfortable asking the question. And that's tough because
that's
the two things that the social engineering people are counting on is either I'm going to elicit some emotion and get you to act based on that, or I'm going to take advantage of the fact that most people truly at the end of the day, they just want to help. They want to be helpful. They want to provide information or lead people down, answer that person's question. And sometimes that's exactly what the adversary is hoping you do.
And they're hesitant to push back and seem rude. So just that whole idea of asking the questions and pushing back, I think sits wrong with a lot of people because they want to be nice.
They want to be nice. They want to be helpful.
Instead of being safe.
Yeah, you ask those questions with a smile.
Yeah.
And we have another question. Michael, your discussion touches on a recent conversation I observed on LinkedIn between security professionals. The issue at stake was how to balance the notion of zero trust, a foundational principle in our industry, alongside the goal of building community and trust within an organization. Right. Do you have any insights? How do we find that balance specifically, especially in light of the risk of insider threats?
Sure. Oh my goodness. So I think part of the challenge there, I think part of the challenge there is security and technology people, we might need to be a little more careful with the nomenclature of what we refer to things, right? The concept of zero trust, it's great technology and also process and procedure and all of these sorts of things. All of it is outstanding. But when you call something zero trust, it seems to kind of set the foundation that, well, you cannot trust anything or anyone. And to a point, that is kind of what drives the initiative. But I've got to at least build that trust with the employee to have that conversation, or with other people in my industry, or in some cases, maybe cross industry. The inability to trust, we have to figure out ways to build the relationships and come to know each other. And we have to do it safely because there are adversaries out there that are going to try and take advantage of that. We have to be careful. We almost need like the secret handshake or password to be able to identify who we are. One of the recent phone calls that I made, they were like, well, I'm not really sure who you are, who you say you are. I said, well, first of all, I'm going to send you email from my corporate email, which could be compromised. So I'm also going to refer you over to my LinkedIn account because my identity over there has also been verified through that system as well. That helped provide some assurance. They came back and they said, okay, we trust you now. But yeah, having those mechanisms, and I'll be honest, I'm looking into some other things that I could, be able to use to verify that identity and frankly, to share that with others and say, yes, I really am that guy. Because even though I'm talking to you all today, I'm on video. I apologize for that. I'm on video. The technologies that are coming out right now are only going to make these things easier for people to do where you almost can't even trust what you see anymore. And it's going to be part of that expansion in social engineering. We talk about other platforms being in use. Some of them are probably going to be picture and video related. There's all sorts of new tools being employed very cheaply and it's very effectively.
That's great. Good pointers all around.
Any last tips that you want to give everyone as we're rounding up this?
Last tips. What have we not talked about? Right now, today, what we've seen in threat reports and things like that have come out kind of puts ransomware and business email compromise as kind of being tied as that number one thing that the adversaries are using to try to monetize attacks and create that disruption, right? My prediction is I believe the email compromise is probably going to pull out ahead, probably as early as this year, if it hasn't already. I think we're going to start, come the new year, we start seeing those reports get published again. I think that's my prediction is that's what we're going to see is it's going to start pulling ahead. They're going to be focused on the credential theft, and that's going to be a major factor. So updating your ability to protect the credentials, MFA, we're now starting to see a little little bit of traction under passwordless. What are you doing to monitor your tokens? Is geofencing something that you can do? But, building those layers on your technical security, but also your incident response plans and playbooks. We got to start getting in the habit of updating those much more often, especially the playbooks specific to this threat because it is evolving so fast. And don't be afraid to have those conversations, involve more people in that dialogue. The folks that are your user community internal to your company, reach out to those networking teams, look for new opportunities to share that information with people that maybe you wouldn't normally have. And that's exactly what I've been doing with our business email compromise, because they're not going away, and we're really looking to expand and build that larger team that isn't just our employees, that's not just within our perimeter, so to speak, but much more globally.
That is very, very true. And I thank you so much for all of this great information, insight, and real tips on what to do differently, because you're right, this is not going away. This is just getting worse. And we all have quite a job. We've got job security, those of us in security.
We do. Sometimes that's daunting.
For better or for worse.
Well, I thank you for letting me come out and talk. It's always fun to actually get the chance to hang out with the cool kids for a change.